Welcome back, my friends. Today on the channel, we're going to do another question and answer video. Once a month on the community tab, my YouTube channel, I'll put out a question prompt such as this one. Down below, you can ask me anything about anything, read each other's questions, and then thumbs up the ones you want me to respond to. Thank you so much to everyone who left a question or read each other's questions. The cutoff for today's video was 60 thumbs up. We got some good ones. And the top-ranked question, with 196 thumbs up, was from Jimmy Jive Funk. That's a great name. And he asks, President Zelensky's victory plan includes the need for a formal invitation from NATO for Ukraine to join the military alliance. How do you see this being arranged, if at all? Thanks so much for your work, Jake. So membership to NATO is preferable, but it's not necessary. And in the short term, I don't think it's likely. The reason why is you need consensus. You need unanimous consent from all NATO members for a new member to join the alliance. So there's just too much Russian money and influence affecting NATO members such as Turkey, Hungary, Slovakia, and Germany. There's always going to be one person who's going to say no and veto Ukraine's membership application. Realistically, the only way for Ukraine to join NATO is Russia's government has to collapse and it has to be replaced by a government that won't influence NATO members to block Ukraine's membership. So what does Ukraine actually want or need that is realistic? And it's a bilateral security treaty with one of the nuclear powers. France, UK, but preferably the United States. And the United States has done this with many nations around the world, mostly in the 1940s and 50s to prevent nuclear proliferation. Given we invented this new technology, nuclear weapons, the fewer people who have nuclear weapons, the better. So in the 1940s and 50s, the United States signed all of these mutual defense treaties telling these countries, you don't need your own nuclear weapons. If a nuclear power attacks you, the United States military has your back. So most of the countries in South America in 1947 signed the Rio Treaty. NATO was 1949, covering most of Europe. The United States also has a bilateral security treaty with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Thailand, Australia, and New Zealand. This is all that Ukraine needs. The problem is, this is different from the Budapest Memorandum, which was just an executive order signed by President Clinton. This has to be a treaty ratified by Congress. The Senate and the House of Representatives has to vote on this for it to become real permanent law in the United States. The Rio Treaty was signed in 1947 and the United States is still honoring it, willing to protect Argentina or Brazil if a nuclear power attacks them. So this is what Ukraine wants and needs. This is going to be a tough sell. The American public will have to have this debate if we want to give real security guarantees to Ukraine. Without it, of course, Ukraine needs to get their own nuclear weapons as fast as possible. Otherwise, Russia will just keep attacking them. So that's the question that NATO members or the United States has to ask. Do we want to leave Ukraine in a situation where they have to get their own nukes to be safe from being attacked by Russia again in the future? Next question, why has Macron gone silent on Ukraine? President Macron of France has gone silent because he got his ass kicked in the June French elections. If you weren't paying attention, Macron's political party, the Ensemble, came in third in the general election. So the blue is the far right, the red is the far left, and Macron is supposed to be the centrist. He's the yellow. So he came in third in the first round, but in French elections they have two rounds. In the second round of voting, thankfully, the far right, which has sympathies to Russia, came in third. But the far left came in first, ahead of Macron's party. This, I think, really spooked Macron. This wasn't supposed to happen. So I'm sure Macron is more concerned with domestic issues, issues that French voters care about more than Ukraine. And that's probably what he's going to be doing the next 2 years. A flaw of democracy is that democratic leaders are always worried about their next election. If they lose their next election, they believe they're not really helping anyone then. So Macron, I think, is going to keep a low profile until 2027 because of the far-left coalition forming the government in their equivalent of parliament. France has divided governments, and France's democracy isn't structured for it to be very effective when it has divided governments. Next question, Jake, which of the following is most likely to happen first? The collapse of the Russian economy, a military coup, and defeat of Russia on the battlefield. And the likelihood is the list you gave, 1, 2, 3. So we'll go in reverse. How likely is it for Ukraine to militarily defeat the Russians on the battlefield? And that's just not possible as long as Russia is still able to regenerate. If Ukraine kills about 1,000 Russian soldiers a day, and Russia is able to conscript and mobilize 1,000 soldiers a day, you're just standing in place. You're not actually making progress. So the belief that we can just give Ukraine more weapons and they will go Rambo on the occupied territories and liberate everything, this isn't how war works. Nations who go to war can fight that war until economically or politically they exhaust themselves and collapse. So that's what we need. The second option of a military coup is not likely because Putin is an intelligence guy. He's a former Soviet KGB officer. So he's always been adversarial with and paranoid of the military. The intelligence community and the military are always the two factions in Russian society vying for power. So Putin deliberately put a lifelong friend, Shoigu, in charge of the military, so nobody in the military would ever rise up against him. Shoigu's incompetent, Shoigu's an idiot, but Shoigu is loyal. But Putin knew that Shoigu was hurting the war effort, so he replaced him with Belousov. And this guy has no military experience. He's an economist. Once again, Putin did this deliberately, so that the apex of the military chain of command would never rise up against him. There wouldn't be a military coup if the guy in charge doesn't even have any military command. So it's important for Putin to make sure that nobody in the military has more competence or more charisma than him, because that's the person that would then lead the coup. So the final option is the collapse of the Russian economy. Friend of the channel, Anders Puck Nielsen, just put out a video 3 days ago about this. Russia's war economy is unsustainable. And Russia's economy has proven more resilient because there's massive stimulus going into the economy. Putin saved up $300 billion. Well, technically he saved up $600 billion, but half was frozen. Putin had, at the start of the full-scale invasion, $300 billion saved up to fight this war. And he's been spending it like crazy. Sign-up bonuses and defense contracts. This has been short-term beneficial, but long-term disastrous. When you spend millions of dollars on bombs and tanks, and those bombs and tanks blow up in Ukraine, there was no value added to the economy. Building hospitals, building bridges, building schools, that is money well spent to advance and develop your economy. So there is a short-term sugar rush, but eventually the money's going to run out. Putin does not have access to the international bond markets. He can't raise funds effectively to continue this war once Russia is out of money. So the only thing they can do is just print. They can pay their soldiers with funny money that's not backed by anything, and that causes hyperinflation. Russia is already experiencing horrendous inflation. Real inflation in Russia is between 20 and 30% year over year, and we're on the third year of this war. On top of that, none of Russia's state industries are operating at a profit anymore. Gazprom falls to first annual loss in its 20 years of history. Rosneft is the same. These industries, oil and gas, are what pay for everything. It's not ordinary Russian taxpayers funding the military. It's Russia's energy giants, and they're no longer operating at a profit. There is no profit to give to Putin to continue these wars. Eventually, this is going to catch up with the Russians and their economy, and hopefully we experience a catastrophic collapse. That's what we're holding out for. Next question. Hi Jake, how impactful is Ukraine's new Palyanytsia drones, and will Ukraine be able to mass produce these? Thanks for being there for Ukraine since day one. Yes, they're having a tremendous impact. In the last week and a half alone, 3 of these major Russian ammunition depots have blown up. They got everything. They got Iran's missiles, they got North Korean artillery shells, they've got Grad rockets, they've got air defense missiles. More or less, these 3 coordinated strikes probably set the Russians back about 4 months worth of fighting on the front lines. And there's more ammunition depots. I think these coordinated drone swarm attacks will continue. Now, can Ukraine make more of them? Of course. And I think Zelensky has been telegraphing to the West what the limitation is. It's not production capability, it's not workers or manpower, it's funding. Inside of this missile, I'm sure, are very expensive chips and electronic components that Ukraine can freely buy from Western companies like, I don't know, Texas Instruments or General Dynamics or whatever. But they just need the money. They just need the funding on top of everything else they need to do to stay in the fight in this war. I also want to speculate, and I'm just going to toss this out here, given that Russia has now destroyed all of Ukraine's thermal power plants. These are power plants that generate electricity by burning coal. I think Ukraine's going to do this to Russia this winter. I think, as a courtesy, Zelensky is waiting until after the November election here in the United States. But given what Russia has done, if these are the rules of war that Russia has done to Ukraine, then Ukraine's going to do it to Russia. I think after the November election, the gloves are going to come off, and Ukraine might start using these kamikaze drones to go after Russia's thermal power plants. If Russia doesn't want to do this anymore, they can stop the war anytime. Next question. Hello there. I am wondering why Biden does not use his presidential Drawdown Authority funds to help Ukraine sooner rather than later. Why does he seek to extend its expiration date? Is the benefit of saving this cash for surprises and unforeseen developments better than getting the supplies to Ukraine sooner? What is your perspective on the matter? So this question was asked a couple days ago, and just yesterday, President Biden announced he would be using the rest of his Drawdown Authority. This is a pool of money under the Foreign Assistance Act that expires at the end of the fiscal year, so the end of this month. Biden was trying to get it extended. Congress couldn't do it, so he had to release the last $5.5 billion on top of some other $2.4 billion from a different fund. And why was Biden trying to extend this? People don't really understand that. I understand the logic. Ukraine needs the help now, get everything to Ukraine now. But Biden and the Pentagon are seriously concerned there won't be any more votes in the U.S. Congress. That $60 billion in aid that was passed last May, that might be it. If Speaker Johnson controls the House of Representatives, Republicans control the House, they can just block a vote again indefinitely forever. And this might be the last military aid or funds that the United States can provide to Ukraine. So I do think it was pertinent to try and extend this money and to deliberately give Ukraine enough every month to stretch out this funding as long as possible, well into 2025, who knows, maybe 2026. That was the thinking. Now, if everything goes well in the November election, if Donald Trump is defeated and MAGA members in Congress are defeated, then Ukraine will get an additional year of funding voted on. But President Biden has to plan for the worst, which is why he was trying to extend this authority for another 6 months or whatever. Next question. Thank you, Jake, for your excellent work. I wonder how you rate the discussion in the UN with strong statements of the Polish and the UK foreign ministers. Is there a chance to get Russia out of the Security Council? Or is the UN a dead organization without any positive effects, except it's costing millions of dollars? There was so much hope after World War II when the UN was created. If you actually learn about or read about the people who started the UN, they sounded utopianist. They were so confident that after World War II, the world could unite and create a lasting peace. Now, the Kremlin and the Soviets had a different agenda, and they kept gobbling up their neighbors, transitioning their governments to communist governments, which were all run by dictators. And we got through the Cold War, and then we got to 1991, and it seemed like the UN was going to have its moments. The Soviet Empire collapsed. We entered a new age of liberal democracy and universal human rights, and China and Russia said no. China and Russia are fascist states. The people of China and Russia have no personal freedoms or liberties. The governments in these countries can make anyone they want disappear at any time for any reason. And Russia has just made a mockery of the UN. It's a dysfunctional organization. I'm not calling for its abolishment, because if we created a new League of Nations with only democratic countries being invited, half the world wouldn't be there then. That's a sad fact, that I think a majority of the world's population live in dictatorships in which the guy in charge never leaves. The guy in charge doesn't care about the well-being of the average citizen. So what I would like to see is for Putin's regime to collapse, economically or politically. There then has to be negotiations. How do we undo sanctions? How do we reverse? How do we give reparations? And it has to be a new future Russian government that just concedes their position on the UN Security Council. It doesn't make sense for Russia to be there. It honestly makes more sense for India to be there. I think if Putin's government collapses, we could have this dialogue, and we could get Russia to be removed. Russia will get something in exchange, sanctions lifted or whatever. But India should really have that seat. Given the size of their country, they have nuclear weapons as well. Geographic representation in the UN, I think that would be more fair and equitable. But really, the structure of the UN Security Council with nations having vetoes, it's abused by America, it's abused by China, it's abused by all the permanent Security Council members. It's a problem. Jake, one topic that has dropped off the radar since the aftermath of the Bucha massacre is what progress Ukraine is making in bringing war criminals to justice. They've processed thousands of POWs, and I doubt they're all blameless. Are they doing DNA matching and the like? The answer is yes. Anytime Ukraine captures a Russian POW, they're screened to make sure there's no evidence that they've already committed war crimes in Ukraine. Here's the article from February of this year. Ukraine is probing over 122,000 suspected war crimes. I don't envy the Ukrainian man who has this job, but yes, records of every war crime, every event is being kept somewhere, with identifying information of the Russian commanders and the Russian soldiers who participated in that war crime. If Ukraine scoops up any Russian POWs on the battlefield with links to any of these events, they're not being traded back. Those people are being kept. There will be show trials for all of these worst offenders. People who commit war crimes in Ukraine, they will be found, they will be brought to justice. Ukraine will hold them all accountable. Hi Jake, do you think the congressional opposition to Ukraine aid will die after the election? Well, that all depends on Donald Trump being defeated. If we can just get rid of Donald Trump, after 9 years, if America can just be liberated from this habitual liar and grifter who's currently selling, I think, watches for $100,000 to his supporters. America can normalize. Speaker Johnson, when Trump gave him permission to be candid, he said what his real opinion is. Speaker Johnson has a son who's, I think, commissioning in the Navy. He's currently at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And Speaker Johnson said, I don't want my son fighting Russia in a future war against NATO. So it makes sense. This is the United States' best security policy to make sure the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine remains intact. Russia has to stop these wars. Russia has to stop attacking their neighbors, thinking they can rebuild their empire. So if we can get rid of Trump, I want to believe the Republican Party and traditional conservatives can normalize, and they'll stop cheering on dictators around the world. If that happens, then yes, I think Congress will pass additional military aid to Ukraine, because this is in the best national security of the United States. Hi, Jake. Is Trump really getting all this popularity, or is it just media hype? I've seen some of his rallies and they appeared to be empty. Most of his fun campaigns appear to be failing. Again, is it real or just media hype? And most important, if it is, how can people counteract it? Thanks in advance. These people are real. Donald Trump has been doing hundreds of rallies around the country for 9 years, and the wackos show up. This has all of the characteristics of a cult. Donald Trump makes everything about himself so that people have to have an opinion on him. I remember US politics in the 90s. I remember the 2000 election and everyone in America screaming how boring it was. Al Gore was boring. George Bush in 2000 was boring. And Donald Trump deliberately says and does polarizing things, inflammatory things, to get you to either love or hate him. He doesn't want you to not be thinking about him. He doesn't want you to have a neutral opinion of him. So how do we counteract Trump? And I think humor is the best antidote. Bullies don't like being made fun of. Donald Trump has been a bully to everyone his entire life. So it's important to mock him, but doesn't feel like it's working. But yeah, you just can't take him serious. You can't take his supporters serious. Anytime you interact with a Trump supporter, call them out. Tell them they're an idiot for supporting Donald Trump and his insane ideas and the horrible, terrible things he says about different groups of Americans. And the key to defeating Donald Trump is voter turnout. When we look at the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton got 65.8 million views. Donald Trump got 62.9. Donald Trump lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. But voter turnout was extremely low, only 60%. So Donald Trump was able to win the Electoral College. Fast forward to 2020, and Joe Biden got 81.2 million votes. Donald Trump got 74.2. 74.2 million Americans were willing to say, I want this guy for another 4 years. But it comes down to voter turnout. An additional 6% of Americans voted in 2020 when they didn't vote in 2016. And that was enough for Trump to lose by 7 million votes. So a majority of Americans hate Donald Trump. They're sick of him. They want someone different. They want something new. I would like something new from the Republican Party and the conservative movement of America. How do we defeat Trump? It's just about getting out the vote. If we can get this up to 65, 66, 67%, Trump stands no chance. That's the election we're having next month in a nutshell. What would a JakeBro peace deal look like? What would you do if you were in the president's shoes in order to stop the war as soon as possible, while avoiding escalation which might tip the scale? Much love from Spain. I don't know if I should tell you guys this because I don't think it's going to happen. And there's already enough people upset with the United States, angry at the United States. But if I was the president, the fastest and easiest way to bring Russia to their knees is to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. This is the economic and political nuclear option that we could take on the Russians. There's only 4 countries that the United States has ever done this to: Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and Syria. How are the economies doing of Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and Syria? Designating a country as a state sponsor of terrorism means that no American business or company or individual can do anything with that country. There are no American companies operating in North Korea. There are no American companies operating in Iran. Why won't the United States do this? And when you designate a state sponsor of terrorism, you pull your embassies out. You pull all your diplomats out. You don't talk to these people because they're a state sponsor of terrorism. So the United States can't do this with Russia because Russia has 6,000 nuclear weapons, which is why when people on Twitter call for this, nobody responds, nobody retweets it. It's because politically, the United States isn't going to do this as long as Russia has 6,000 nuclear warheads. But yeah, this would be the fastest option to collapse the Russian economy. This would be the nuclear option that I think would end this war the fastest. The problem is that this would economically hurt the United States. If Russia was designated a state sponsor of terrorism, every company has to instantly stop doing business with Russia, which would greatly impact the US economy. So that would cause the stock market to go down. That would cause GDP growth to slow. I know people want to do everything they can think of to end this war as fast as possible, but politicians in a democracy can't do this. They can't economically hurt themselves to an extent where far-right movements can get elected saying, vote for me and I will end these stupid sanctions. I will end what is hurting our economy. Donald Trump is already saying this. And the US economy is doing very well. Stock market's at all-time high, inflation's under 3%, unemployment's under 4%. Like, could you imagine what Donald Trump would be saying right now if the US economy was doing bad? I don't think the election would even be close. I think it would be a blowout in favor of Trump if the US economy was actually bad right now. Next question. Since F-16s have arrived but seem to mostly be used for defensive purposes at the moment, when do you think we can see the Kerch Strait Bridge go boom? I think Ukraine is being more conservative with their F-16s given they lost one. I'm still thinking about that incident from a couple weeks ago, and I don't think it was friendly fire. I don't think the jet was shot down by a Patriot system, but it might have been a mechanical malfunction, or the pilot was just stressing the jet too much. This pilot, I think his name was Moon, I can't remember his call sign, but I'm sure he was trying to speed from one drone or missile to another. He was probably rapidly accelerating and decelerating the F-16 to shoot down multiple targets in a single night, and the jet fell out of the sky. The engine stalled, probably. We don't have the conclusion of the investigation. They haven't released the data from the black box. I'm sure we'll find out soon, but that's why Ukraine is being conservative with their F-16s at the moment. They want the results of this investigation so the incident doesn't happen again. Concerning the Kerch Strait Bridge, there's something happening here that we don't know about, because Ukraine does have the tools at the moment to bring down this bridge. And the easiest way to bring down this bridge is to go for the archway. If Ukraine used their domestically produced jet drones, and they sent 100 of them, I think they could bring this down. I think if they went for the archway, this is the weakest point of the bridge, they could get this to collapse. Here's the problem. If you collapse specifically the archway section, if this comes down and ships can no longer sail under the bridge, well, now you've just cut off Russian commercial shipping. There are Russian grain ships and steel ships or whatever importing and exporting going under this bridge. And if you collapse the bridge at the weakest point and the ships can no longer get in and out, well, does that mean that Russia's going to start targeting Ukraine's grain ships? It's crazy to think 2.5 years into this war, there's still more Russia could be doing to hurt Ukraine and more Ukraine could be doing to hurt Russia. And I think there are back-channel communications where they're telling each other this. Russia, if you do this, will go after your thermal power plants. Ukraine, if you do this, will go after your grain ships, sailing in NATO waters along Romania and Bulgaria. So the reason why this bridge hasn't come down, I think there might be some kind of unspoken agreement between the two nations, and that could be the reason why. Russia has publicly declared to the world that they're not using the bridge for military purposes. They're using the land bridge to truck and rail supplies to Crimea. Okay, Russia, I still think the bridge has to go, but maybe Ukraine is saying as long as you don't use, I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic. Russia can always escalate, and if they do, Ukraine can bring down this bridge. All right, that's all for this Q&A. Thank you so much to everyone. If you made it this far, you're a super fan. I greatly appreciate your support for this channel. We've actually gained quite a few members in the last 2 weeks. My viewership really spiked with the destruction of these ammunition depots, given Zelensky's visit to America and the US election coming up. I'm going to be doing my thing here on YouTube, making videos almost every day in support of Ukraine, and thank you for being here with me. That's all for this Q&A. Till the next one, take care, everyone.